Okay, it's 2:30. We're going to have a public safety budget meeting with the Syracuse Police Department. We have Chief Buckner here, and Chief, I'd like you to introduce your staff, and then please give us an overview of where you are now this year with you can give us a few of your accolades, things that have gone well and whatnot, and
Okay.
tell us where you're headed next year.
Okay. So, first of all, I'd like to introduce Mr. Lutz, Sergeant Lutz, who's over our finance office. This is First Deputy Chief Joe Cecil. In the audience with me is Wendy Murphy over HR, Deputy Chief Lynette Del Favro, Deputy Chief Schaff, Mark Russin, and Deputy Chief McGork is here with us. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for certainly making public safety a priority and your unwavering support of the police department. I'd also like to just kind of start with a couple of accomplishments. Last year, if you look at the slides that I gave you a copy of a PowerPoint slide. The purpose of the PowerPoint slide is for you all to see the information that we will be providing your constituents as we roll out, kind of informing them what the reorganization was, what the impact is to the community, and what it means to the workforce. But on page 5, if you take a look at that, it is, you'll see that last year for 2018, we finished with a 6.5% decrease in overall crime. That included a 1% pretty much flat with violent crime, and then a 1% reduction in property crime. Obviously, that's the report card for the police department, or one of the things that is a part of the significant measurement of what we do. The other part of that is obviously me coming on the department in November of 2018 and being sworn in actually on December the 3rd, and the transition that we've made in leadership for a police department, one of your larger departments in city government. That's a significant undertaking. I greatly appreciate the opportunity that you've given me to lead this police department. Very, very happy to be here in Syracuse, and the challenges that lie ahead. I feel very confident that you will certainly see some improvements on the things that keep us all up at night during our administration. So let's go to page 14 of that document that I gave you. Again, just a couple of things that I want to highlight to you before I get into some budget things. So on page 14, the reorganization basically was some of the key elements of that is one of the things is we took the captains from the shift responsibilities to a geographical responsibility. That empowers that level of the organization, which we see as the first level of executive leadership in a police department. And we also feel like that we push resources closer to the public, where at the operational level where we actually serve. Part of the resources that they receive for that is the community police officers are now assigned to the patrol captains. Also, we will talk about some alignments that we're looking at, some that have been done, and we're considering of putting sworn positions back to patrol to the front line, and then putting those positions as a civilian responsibility going forward. One of the other things that we often hear complaints or concerns raised about is our ability to respond to property crimes. Property crimes is about 80% of the crime in our city, even though violent crime makes up a lot of the headlines in our news. So we felt that having property crime detectives at the divisional level would be able to improve our operational response to a substantive piece of the overall crime in our city. This actually operationally went into effect on March the 25th for our patrol officers. There was very little impact to them at the operational level, but it went into effect on March the 25th. Page 15 of that, you'll see that the department is divided into 3 divisions. That is North, Southwest, and Southeast. You can see those 3 there. If you'll go to page 16 of your document, for the North Division, that includes Councilman Carney, Councilman Ryan, Councilwoman Allen, Councilman Driscoll. makes up the North Division. The Southwest Division is Councilman Ryan, Councilwoman Grinnell, and then Councilwoman Allen also make up the Southwest. And then lastly, the Southeast District, again, is Councilman Carney, Councilwoman Grinnell, Councilwoman Allen, and Councilman Driscoll. So that you all know who is responsible for your area of responsibilities for the city. And that I think that you all, just in the very early stages of complaints that you send us, whether that be through email or a text message to me, that we get that information out very quickly. We expect a very swift response from that as well, and I think that you're seeing some of the benefits of having that geographical responsibility for the captains, and we're very satisfied in what we're seeing early with that. From a neighborhood standpoint, if you look on page 17, you can see some of the larger neighborhoods and how they are broken up with this divisional split. That's on page 17. And if you go to page 18, one of the things that you will see is that the city of Syracuse is divided into 22 territories. When we broke this up, there were 9 given to the North Division, there were 7 given to Southeast, and 6 to the Southwest Division. And the reason that is significantly smaller is because if you look on page 18, you will see that a significant portion of our shootings, violent crime occurs in the Southwest. So we wanted that area to be smaller in responsibility because the calls for service, the types of things that we engage on a day-to-day basis are more substantive there. So we wanted that area to be more manageable for the captain that had that area. Last page is 19. You can see some of the streets there when we roll this out to the communities. One of my first presentations will be tomorrow night to all of there's a banquet, I believe it is, for the neighborhood watches for the city of Syracuse. All of them will be in one location, and we will do this presentation with them so that they will be able to see what this means at the neighborhood level. You all have asked about our community police officers. With them now, one of the things that happened with their change is we switched their hours to be more reflective of the responsibilities that they have, which includes kind of a late morning, 11 o'clock-ish to a noon or so, in the early evenings. We think that helps us be able to respond with those officers to address those issues. Also reducing overtime because they're not coming in on the early shifts that they formerly had. I will be honest with you that this has resulted in a few folks retiring and moving on, and we will have to fill those spots with other individuals coming behind them, but we felt that was in the best interest of our operations. We talked about the property crime detectives. I've also added a sergeant to internal affairs. One of the reasons for that, many of you are aware of some of the complaints that we received from the CRB. One of the things is administratively we are behind on both reports from the 2018 and 2019, I think maybe even some 2017 reports that need to be put in, and we want to be able to better to administratively respond to that. There's also been another sergeant added to the training academy. Because we do a great job with our academy, it's a 24-week academy, we wanted to improve our ability to do continuing education with our in-service training to the workforce. We also now have a Office of Public Affairs. If you remember what our social media looked like just as late as a year ago versus what we showed today, it's more reflective of community policing, constructive contact, providing information to the public, two-way conversations. We're very responsive to the information that we get from individuals on social media. We will look for that to do nothing but improve. Lastly, one of our captains retired. That position was not filled. We did away with that captain position because we didn't feel like that we needed another captain spot, and that was an emergency management position that is now held by a lieutenant. Couple of policies that will be heading your way. We have a presentation coming up to the mayor's office first, and that is the use of force policy. That was the number one thing from a policy standpoint that both you all and our citizens has been asking that we update that policy, that it's reflective of 21st century language. We've done that. We're also in the process of working on our LGBTQ policy, which we currently do not have one, but we're in the process of drafting one and also working with some organizations and members that represent that demographic to make sure that it's an inclusive process for the individuals that may be impacted by that. On somewhat of a lighter note, we also have policy that we're getting ready to change with the workforce, that our officers will no longer have to cover their tattoos. In the past, they would have to wear the sleeve if they were in uniform to cover those tattoos. We're trying to evolve with the rest of the world, and there are many agencies that have changed those things. I can tell you that I'm kind of old school in that regard, that there were certain things you just didn't do with the uniform, but I also have to recognize that our world is changing, and tattoos doesn't mean today what it meant 30 years ago when you see someone with the tattoo. For those of you who may be sitting at the table with the tattoo, both visible and unseen, I don't think less of you because of that. But we're changing that, and our officers are appreciative of that.
Before you move any further.
Go ahead, ma'am.
The mental, you talked about all the policy changes. What
Yeah.
are you doing for mental health? You talked about LGBTQ, you talked about the policy changes. Are there something being done with the policy regarding mental health?
Mental health issues, if you're talking about responding to individuals who struggle with issues in a mental capacity, that's addressed in our policy. When you see some of the language, when you talk about de-escalation, when you talk about crisis intervention training, we're trying to increase the number of officers that are certified in CIT. In a perfect world, we would have 20% of our workforce that would have that certification. We're nowhere near that. We're increasing that, but that is addressed in the new use of force policy. Many of the things in the use of force policy were already being done, both in operations and in our training. They were just not reflective in the language, and we have cleaned that up.
Thank you.
So maybe before we go into some questions, I'd like to introduce all the counselors that are here. We have Counselor Allen, Counselor Rudd, Counselor Bay, President Helen Hudson, Counselor Green, Counselor Driscoll, and Counselor Lovejoy Grinnell. And myself, I'm Steve Thompson. So, questions, budget stuff, which is what we're here for. So why don't you tell us, I see in here you've given, you might have beat the fire department this time on the handouts. Why we got to weigh these later, they're pretty heavy. But you've given a great analysis, but you might want to walk through a little bit of this. Where are we staffing-wise and overtime-wise?
Okay. Let's go into some of the staffing. So currently today, from a staffing standpoint, we sit at there are 401 sworn police officers as of April the 15th. We're authorized for 463. We are scheduled to have a class begin on May the 21st. We anticipate that class will be 39 candidates in that class. There are also a handful of certified officers that have placed an application with us that we want to see if we're able to process them quick enough to be able to get them, to add them in that class. Obviously, it will be abbreviated what they will have to go through before they're released solo. But our goal is to have 39 on May 21st to start that class. Again, the authorized strength of being 463. Also, with the civilians, the same thing. We have several positions that are vacant for civilian that we're in the process of posting some of those jobs, some of which that will be a part of the alignment that we're looking at right now to see what the agency will look like going forward. Your next question, sir, was about overtime.
Yes, and how is this equating to overtime and staffing levels?
Well, when you look at overtime, well, there are a number of things that we feel that we need to do to be able to address that. The first thing is to certainly understand that no matter what we do, there's going to be overtime for the police department. My job here in the very near future is to make sure that I can provide an intelligent response for every dollar that we spend in the budget. And overtime is certainly one of the things that will be highly scrutinized. That includes looking at shifts. That includes looking at the responsibilities of some of our sworn officers that we currently have today, to where we feel like that a civilian may be able to do that job. And I will tell you that we've identified 16 positions that we currently have a sworn police officer doing the job that we believe that after our checking or assessing that we will have an opportunity to move those positions to where the primary responsibilities will be done with a civilian. 2 of those are in human resources. There are 3 in records. There are 5 in crime scene. I would give you somewhat of a caveat with the crime scene because of the significant investigative responsibilities that they currently have with our investigations with CID. That is something that we will do incrementally, that we will do that as these individuals retire. We will replace with civilians and kind of have them intermingle with the people who are currently there. And at some point, maybe over the next 5 or so years ago, then that will at some point be all civilian. But we did not feel comfortable going in and completely turning that into civilian because of the responsibilities that they have. I did have the sergeant who's over that unit go and look at an organization that has civilians 100% doing the job, and he was able to see that it's very common across the country to be able to do so. The next thing is the property room. The good thing about the property room is that we have a sergeant and 3 officers that are currently there. We believe that the vast majority of the property room can be run by civilians. The 3 individuals who are eligible for retirement here in the near future plan to retire. Our goal is to rehire those individuals, bring them back as civilians, whereas because of their retired status, they will be the max that they can make, I believe, is $30,000 for the position. So we may have to hire an additional civilian to do that, but we will no longer need sworn police officers doing the job. And then some of the responsibilities that they have that require a sworn police officer to assist with that, we will have a sworn individual to be able to assist with that. But the day-to-day operational parts of that does not need to be a sworn police officer. The next thing will be special events. 1 position, 1 also in IT and transportation for the total of 16. We think that this will help with some of that. And again, us trying to be good stewards of both our dollars and our personnel, we want to try to push as many people as we can to the front line of the police department. And we think this is one of the avenues to be able to do so.
Chief, when with the people in the crime scene, have you discussed this with the forensic science, with the lab, and any discussion with them about this?
I have personally not talking to the lab about it. About that, the one thing that we talked to the lab about that we had big questions about was the property room because of transporting items to both from court and to property rooms, securing those things. There was a question about that. There was also some state language that says that a sworn person has to do certain things. So we addressed those issues with the lab, and they were okay with the decision that we made, but not specifically for a crime scene. Now, Sergeant Renna may have discussed that with them, who was a part of going to take a look at one of the agencies that we sent him to. I believe it was Fort Lauderdale that we looked at. He discussed that with. So he may have, but I certainly did not directly. No, sir.
If you need somebody to go to Fort Lauderdale,
Renna was very happy to go too. So that was a good trip for him. I don't know if Chief
Take him
McCourt
right
is
before
aware
the
of
budget vote.
conversation
Just
we've
send
had
him
with
that.
them.
and aware of any concern with that, with the
From
crime
lab?
lab for
I've had a
switching?
lot of conversation with Sergeant Wren about it. He's still in the middle of the research with the understanding this is nothing that's gonna happen
Okay,
in the near future.
okay.
You had other questions about the overtime, sir? Was there something additional?
No, I think you've got the different breakdown here is meet minimum staffing levels, various police operations.
Yes, sir.
And then support. The various police operations are, does this entail?
Yeah, they're defined on one of our pages here. Let me see. Mr. Lutz, if you can help me out.
It's on page 7, sir.
7. Yeah, if you look at page 7 at the bottom left of there, you can see that some of the operational things that actually come up for the overtime. And it's about a 75-25% split. 25% of the overtime we get some level of reimbursement for it, and then the other 75% we do not.
Questions?
Thank you. I'll start on page 7 since we just left off there.
Okay.
Your
On the overtime document?
yeah, so we're paying officers overtime to attend neighborhood watch meetings?
That was one of the things from the community police officers that in many instances, because they were working 7 to 3, and then when you have your neighborhood watch meeting at 6 p.m., they were on overtime. Well, with me changing their shifts, some of the times, I'm not saying it's going to be every time, if there's a weekend or if there's something to where maybe it started early or something, that you can still see that. But we should not see that consistently from our officers that attend their neighborhood watch meetings because the shifts have been changed.
Okay. And on page 6, the summer deployment, so is it because you guys have more officers out during the summertime? That's why?
The summer deployment is a part of a strategy that we do every year in response to the uptick in crime that we expect during the warm weather months, that we try to put folks who are formerly worked in maybe a plainclothes capacity that come out and work, I believe, 3 shifts during the summer, that they assist the uniform patrol with trying to manage the city at a time when we're going through a spike.
Okay.
And we plan to do that again this year.
So when do you guys start that? Like, what's the time
I don't
frame?
know, the start date is June 1st.
June 1st, and it just goes through what, like Labor Day?
Yep, Labor Day, you know that better than I do, so
Okay.
yes.
All right. And the other question, so our vacancies, I'm on page 1. So we have 3 vacancies for captain and 5 for sergeants.
Well, the sergeants is correct. The 3 vacancies is actually 1. Because of the deputy chiefs being in an appointed capacity, we hold 2 of those spots for the 2 of the deputy chiefs who are currently sitting in the deputy chief position, that if they were to go back or if something were to happen, that they will be able to go back to their civil service rank of captain.
Okay, and the 5, are you looking to fill those for the sergeants?
It just depends on what we do going forward. Right now, I feel like that we're pretty good with our sergeants. We just recently did a big promotion where I believe there were 14 individuals that were promoted, so I feel pretty good about that. The only thing that we may do something here in the near future is once Lynette lets me know that she feels comfortable that we can begin moving down the road with some of the property crime detectives, I'm going to have a supervisor for that. Initially, I may look to see if we can do it with the workforce that we have, but I'm very hesitant about taking another officer's position from the workforce at a time that we're getting ready to go through our peak season.
Okay. And then on the other handout that you gave us, the
Yes, sir.
PowerPoint.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
On page, well, it really doesn't matter, but just looking off the map on page 16, is there going to be an opportunity for us to kind of get acclimated with the captains that you put in charge of our districts?
Yes.
Because I'm looking at these 3 captains. Like, I don't personally know them, but if I do need to call them, I want to be able to already have some type of relationship with them before I just make like a cold call for them to come help if
So
needed.
that
So
you
is
don't
it
feel guilty for
possible?
calling them at 1 in the morning.
Right. Is it possible for you to kind of, for us as the district counselors that you have on here, to kind of put us together, and that way we can kind of tell them what we expect. They can tell us what their duties are, what they're assigned to do. So that
Yes,
way we'll know.
one of the things, because the rollout of this with the neighborhood watch meetings is obviously a captured audience, but the thing that I will come back to each of you individually and collectively is to find out where you would like for us to hold other meetings with your constituents and areas, and I would hope that you will be able to attend those so you can meet the captain, make the appropriate
Right.
introductions to the key people who call you or that you lean on in your respective areas so that they know who those individuals are. But there will be certainly a formal introduction, but the contact information that you already have is there.
Okay.
And when in doubt, certainly please email or call me, and I will also make sure that you get the appropriate person that
Okay.
responds to you.
I appreciate that. Right now, I just use Shaw, so I kind of call him for everything. So
Schaff's a good man to use.
thank you. I'm all set.
Counselor Rudd. Yeah, we'll go right down the line.
The orange tie is awesome.
Thank you, sir. It matches the.
Even the
Comment on the line.
even the lining is orange. That's how you know you're all in.
Everything's intentional, sir.
You're all in on Syracuse. I like it. So the head count with describe the 463, 39 in the class, that gets you to the 502 that we see on page 180. You're talking about 16 civilianized, so does that mean your head count For the union, for
Which
the,
document are you in, sir?
I'm looking at page 180 of the budget
Okay.
handout. Not your budget, but like the budget that we had before we showed up.
It's, okay, go ahead. I think we're on the
So
same
on
page.
page 180, there's the 502 that you see
Yes, sir.
on the right-hand side, and I was saying that seems like the 463 you described plus the 39 in the class, that gets us to the 502. Then you described the 16 to be civilianized. So does that mean that this 502 becomes 486 if everything works out?
No, those individuals are already counted somewhere in either field services or general services, but the conversion will probably take them in many instances from a general services position to where their field services would patrol. Meaning if you're working in the public safety building, currently performing a function, that more often than not, the 16 that we discussed will then be going to Chief Del Favro, who's over the uniform division.
So civilianizing 16 positions doesn't change the head count of
It does not. So
I mean, not
we're-
the, but isn't this the uniform number? Is this the uniform number, the 502? No, it's a mixed number, I see. Okay.
of different jobs in there. Yes, sir.
Okay, then yeah, it wouldn't change to the total. But some,
What it does give
if I
us
was
is-
looking at the right place, somewhere there would be a shift of 16 fewer.
Yes, you would see
uniform
16
count
fewer
if I
people,
looked at the
to
right.
where we would have to hire civilians to backfill them, but I'm pushing a police officer out without going through an academy class to be able to do so.
Okay, so here's my main question.
Yes,
You're
sir.
still relatively new,
Yes, sir.
and you have all this outside experience. And how do you come in and figure out how many officers we need? Like when you come in and figure out what's appropriate. So I'll give you a little context. A year ago, I asked Chief Fowler basically about his head count, and he was basically like, we need more. That's the answer, we need more. And I was like, well, would it look like we need more if you looked at the number of officers per 1,000 people? And he said, oh, well, that's not fair because we work less, like given the work rules and the union the union contracts we have and everything. So I was just wondering, how did you come in and look at the appropriateness of your overall staffing, and how do you feel about it right now?
Well, I will tell you that much of the evaluation that I've done thus far has been the rearview mirror of my experience in working in 2 other police departments, attending trainings and certifications across the country and being familiar with other organizations, and the eye test. I think that one of the benefits of having an outside chief is that you have seen that things have been done another way. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's always better, but you know that there's other ways to do things. But some of those things we think will work in Syracuse. We'll always look at it to build a Syracuse model. You'll never see me take something going on in Chicago and try to drop it into our city to make it fit. We'll have to build a Syracuse model each time. But I can certainly tell you that some of these jobs are where we clearly have a badge and gun doing the job, that there's no common sense way to look at some of these things and be able to, for me, explain to you that we need a badge and gun doing that job. So I don't think we need to bring in an expert to look at those kinds of things. Some of that is the PD getting away from that's the way we've always done it kind of mentality of looking at things, which brings up a dirty word called change. And that's very, very difficult for all of us to digest at times. But we certainly want to look at that because before I can go to the mayor and have him come on my behalf to you all to say, hey, we need more of this or more of that, the first thing that I need to be able to do is to say that I'm being a good steward of what I already have. And I believe that I have opportunity for improvement in realigning the police department to push more of these civilian performing sworn officers today to their traditional police roles that they signed up to do in this job.
So I'm a civilian.
Yes, sir.
I've never worked in a police or military organization. So, but people talk to me on the street, they'll say, so what percentage of the guys are working, or what percentage of the force is out, like, answering calls, essentially? Like, I think that's what the public thinks of when they think of police work. And then how does, and I know it gets complicated because patrol, which is the word I want to use, there's more people in other units that aren't patrol that are out on the street and all of that. But roughly speaking, the people who answer calls, how does I had always heard before you arrived that our percentage was low of the people who are out doing that kind of thing compared to what exists in other departments across the country. Do you have what's your opinion on that? Do you think that I think has there been a reallocation of people to the way a lot of citizens kind of define police work, like go out, you're driving, or drive, answer calls, responding to calls, I guess I would say.
Well, I again, just looking at it from an operational standpoint, I feel like that we need more of not only just personnel in patrol, but an emphasis on patrol. And you know, when we have a class that goes solo, so it takes us 24 weeks to put an academy class on, and then there's 12 weeks of an FTO period. I think that if you don't keep a watchful eye on that, then we will be very quick to always fill vacancies in other places of the organization. One of the things that I've asked our staff to do is to work with each other, because there are needs all over the police department, but we want to try to get to a place to where we're having a 80% net gain of patrol from each recruit class that's coming out, so that we can begin to say that, hey, we've used our resources to the best of our abilities. So that's what we're doing here in the early stages. I'm a huge proponent of bringing in outside eyes to look at things. Once we've done the realignment of the police department, maybe in a year and a half or so, maybe we bring in an expert to take a look at the calls for service, what we're doing with our time from a response to these calls, which I think is another big challenge that we have, the amount of time that it takes us to get to these calls, what we're doing during those investigative periods, what are we doing with self-initiated activity, downtime. Look at all of those things to see if we are aligned today like we should be. Looking at the numbers, they may come back and say, well, based upon officer to citizen ratio, you all have the numbers that you need to have, but they're not deployed maybe in the most effective way. I value outside opinions about those kinds of things. I think at some point we need to do that exercise, but I think that in the early stages, I can already see things on the surface that I believe that our police department would be more efficient if we did that. And some of that is being able to deliver some of the bad news of saying that you can no longer work from 7 to 3 because we need you from 11 to 7 or from 12 to 8. Those are tough decisions to have with people, but that's never personal. It's always business. It's always in the best interest of our city as a whole and our police department as a whole. So we're still in the continuing process of evaluating all of those things, so that we're making the best decisions for the city.
My last question, I know you're the leader of all the officers, and then at the same time you are the chief administrator of the department. So how would we have the four-day work schedule, 4/8s, 4 on, 2 off. How would adjusting that to a 5-day schedule or alternative schedules assist, how would it affect your ability to provide efficient services for the city?
Well, I would want to look to see, not just to change something because maybe it looks like it's sliced bread. I would want data to be able to support any significant decisions that I make. I would also want to be able to work hand in hand with the union to try to come up with middle ground on things. Yes, I'm the chief of police, and you all are common council, and we have a mayor, but we also have officers, we also have union environments, and there are things that we have to kind of work in concert to be able to accomplish some of these things. Looking at the schedule that we currently have now, that has not been something that I have studied extensively, more so looking at where we have people in the organization. As far as the shifts are concerned, we've taken a brief look at going to a 4-10 schedule. 4-10 schedules give you police officers, it puts more officers, they get more off day. Well, no, they have to work, I believe it was maybe a couple of more days additional. I can't remember the exact number of days additional, Joe, we would get with it. But the benefit was it would give us an overlap, meaning more officers during peak hours of our day. Problem is we need more officers to pull it off, and we need more vehicles to be able to do so. So that's something that we've looked at, because I don't want to go to something that's because 410 is a very officer-friendly schedule. I had it when I was a uniformed police officer. Officers love it. But I also have to make first that it's good for the city. So we're in the process of looking at that from a schedule standpoint. I have not looked at the other schedule that you described. We've only looked at the 410.
Thank you. Yep.
Well, One, I'm gonna credit my counselors because it happens a lot that the questions that we have sometimes get asked before it gets to us.
Yes.
So
You got to put Mr. Rudd at the end then.
the other thing though, so it only leaves my comments are short, so I have no question, but I want to express my appreciation for the effort going into year 20 for overtime reduction for both sworn and civilian, which I think we all can appreciate. Clearly, that's not easy to do considering. Also, from a more lighthearted perspective, it appears we have another competition between police and fire besides basketball. Budget presentation preparedness.
Are they still?
Look like you got competition, Chief Mons.
Well, I would want to say to you publicly that it was a low-down, dirty trick that they saved a dog 2 days before they did their presentation, and I believe that was set up. That was a low-down, dirty trick.
Rebel, you saying Rebel was an inside job?
Yes, yes.
I'd just like to point out a couple of things that sometimes when we're looking at just numbers, we pass on. I mean, it says in here that police response for service, it goes through
Which page, sir?
page 175. This is just on the field services. Talks about miles logged and everything else. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that it's a singular number, but I would suggest, and you can correct me, Chief, but I mean, I think about 80+% of these require 2 officers now, whereas in years past, they used to require 1. Mm-hmm. So while it may say that you have 1,000 calls for this one thing, it's not 1 officer going to that call, it's actually 2. And the times that these things last are also with today's state mandated requirements that don't give you the personnel to do it, the reports that have to be written, the stuff that has to be done for the DA's office, all this is very, and I'm just saying that as a matter of every year I see these, and Councilor Rudd says he'd like to see some things changed on the activity indicators. When we have multiple agencies or multiple units, like with fire and police, where it says fire here, 1, 2, 3, you might have 5 units at that. Mm-hmm. So it makes a difference when we're looking at it, and I don't know how we get that in there, but I want to commend you once again for your presentation and the people that put it together. So, thanks.
And just for the calls for service, Chief Del Favro just recently had some of the numbers pulled, and it's based upon 2018 calls for service. We took 133,000 calls. That averages to about 367 per day, about 15 calls per hour. But to your point, when you look at 15 calls per hour, you think that's not a lot. But if you're tying up 2 officers each time on many of these calls, or we get stuck with a stabbing or something where we're having to hold a scene for Chief McGork's people to come in and do what they do, very quickly your officers can be taxed with some of the things that we face in our city, which is also why we can't do initiatives based solely upon numbers, because there's a narrative behind every number. And the types of calls that we make in our city are very substantive and many times. So the ratio that may work for another city with the similar population, because of the challenges that we have, we may need more police officers because of that.
Great. Thank you.
I only have 2 questions, and I'm gonna assume that this is gonna be the same as fire. You're doing transfers when you have like police, fire, injured on duty. Same question I asked fire, 0. So is that a transfer? Is that a budget transfer?
Could you state your question again, ma'am?
181.
Okay.
And I'm looking at it. It was the same with fire, and it says police, fire, injured on duty. And I was explained too that it's a budget transfer. So is that the case here as well? I
will lean on Mr. Lutz if he will be able to answer that question. I don't know the direct answer to that question.
It is, at the end of the year, it's a budget transfer, ma'am. It's not something the city budgets for ahead of time. It's an unpredictable number.
Okay. And another last question. I think you're aware that we get a lot of the calls as well from citizens and from police officers and things like that. I received a call, and I'm curious because you still have community policing, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I was approached last week and said that you had taken away all the community police.
No, ma'am. What they may be misinterpreting is that in some instances, some of our officers who were community police officers were physically assigned to locations to where people may have grown comfortable or consistently seeing them in that location. Well, we have too many challenges to have you in one location all day. We still want significant contact with many of these community centers, but I also need you out problem solving, doing some of these things throughout our city without being stationary in one location. So if those community centers need us to do something, or you're having a community program to where kids are doing something and you want us to interact, we'll come there for your 2-hour program. But to say that I'm going to have an officer camped out for 6 hours in the Westcott Center, I just can't afford to do that. Because I can better utilize my resources if I move them about. And again, about with the decentralization, it's empowering the captain. So when I'm receiving calls from Miss Allen that something's going on in her division, that captain needs to be able to have resources to deploy to go and do that, because Chief Del Fabro's uniformed police officers, they're doing the calls for service. So I need someone to go and do this problem-solving things that we can't do on every calls for service that we have, because we're pretty much back-to-back calls with that. So that's probably some of the information that you're getting, which is why it's important for us to go and roll this out to the community to allow us to be able to explain many of those things.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Green.
I had one thing before we go to Mr. Green. Ma'am, I was prepared for you to go to your cold case, but you didn't do it today, but I was ready for you.
Okay, let's go to my
Let's
cold
go to cold
case. Where
case.
you at with the cold
Okay,
cases?
so
How
we-
many officers sitting on them? How many cases you looking at? Talk
I
to
had
me.
it all ready for you. So, so we have 2 detectives in there, and by definition, a case is cold at 5 years. Since 2013, we've solved 3 cold cases. There was 1 in 2013, 1 in 2015, 1 in 2016. Again, we said we have 2 officers there. They currently have 81 cases assigned to them. Of the 81 cases, 71 is homicides. There are 8 that are missing persons. And usually if we put one as a missing person, it's because there's some questions about that missing person that lead us to believe that there may be something foul with that. And the other one is suspicious, dead on arrival, and then a fatal fire. So we do have the 2 individuals that are doing that. To say that we've solved 3 in recent history tells you that they're doing great work, because many of these cases, our CID folks have about an 80-something% clearance rate, which is about 20% higher than the national average. So when we turn over a cold case, it's truly a cold case to where they have been stuck. So to say that they have taken 3 of those cases in recent history and been able to make an arrest, that tells you that they're doing a really, really good job.
So question on the cold cases for you. Do you know, because I know some of them date back to 2005, so I know a couple that's
Yes,
that
ma'am.
far back. What's the dates back on these cold
Now,
cases?
that I don't know.
The oldest case we have, ma'am, is 1958. That they're working on. I mean, they work on, we've got cases throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're being worked on all the time.
You see my face, right? You said 1950. Whoa.
1958.
Well, I can tell you that's, I didn't know we went back that far. Coming here from Little Rock, I can tell you that we probably put 15 or so cases a year that were not solved.
But let me ask
So
you
that's
this.
significant.
Question for you, though, because I've been told on some of the
Sorry,
cold
can we ask,
cases.
can we ask him just to stand at the mic?
Oh, okay.
Mike, yeah, just so we
Chief.
Some of the cold cases, because I've been asking questions, and thank you, Chief, for bringing that back up. See, I was done. I've been asking about some of the cold cases because I do know the families attached to them, and they've been told that the folks that committed the crime, some of them are dead and some of them are in jail. So why can't they have that information?
But without knowing the cases that you're speaking about,
Wayne Watts, they said one is dead, one's in jail.
okay. without speaking about a particular case, what I would tell you is this. Those are often our best guess. So out of the 81%, or excuse me, out of the 81 unsolved homicide, missing person, fatal fire investigations that we work on, in the vast majority of them, and I can't give you a number, but in the vast majority of them, we have a suspect in mind. It's pretty clear. If I were to give you all the reports and you were to read them, you could read them and at the end of these reports say, well, that's probably your guy or that's probably your girl. It's nothing that we can necessarily, it's not enough to bring to court though. And so while our best guess in those cases are, we believe the suspect to be dead, we believe the person to be in jail, if we're not certain enough to bring that case to court, that's not something that we want to bet on to release information. We have, in the past, information has gotten out that we didn't want to get out, not from us, but it's gotten out, it's been leaked through some other avenues. And that complicates cases in ways that you can't even imagine. It puts people's lives in danger as far as witnesses are concerned. And so for us to provide information to people, it's not that we don't want to provide the families with some closure, and they're welcome to come in and talk to us anytime. They can come in, they can get a hold of me, we'll set that up, and we'll take care of, and we'll explain as much as we can, and I'll explain all this to them.
Okay.
There's just some information that we can't provide because we don't want to jeopardize the integrity of the case in the event that at some point we can bring a case.
But
So
if
that's
they're
number
dead,
one.
they're dead. There's nothing you could do about that.
If we get information, so let's just say, for instance, we give information. Hey, we believe this is the person who did it, and they're dead. And I have one case in mind that you didn't mention, but I have one case in
Yeah, I
mind
know
right
which
now.
one you got. Yeah.
I don't know if you do.
Yeah,
But, but in any event, I believe the suspect to be deceased in this particular case. But that's based on a lot of talk on the streets. Now, I believe it to be accurate because I'm hearing enough of it from who I believe to be the right people. However, it is not uncommon to find out, I shouldn't say it's not uncommon, it happens where you find out at some point that you were wrong. You were barking up the wrong tree, and maybe that's why the case went cold to begin with, because you were looking over here when the suspect was over here. So if we commit and we provide that information and find out from somebody down the line through DNA evidence or some other forensic avenue or through a witness, an eyewitness that comes forward and says, listen, I didn't come forward before, but I was there and this is actually the person. That's just a vicious rumor that's been flying around because there was a dispute between those two people, and that's kind of how it got kicked off. But the reality is I saw it and this is the person that did it. We've now kind of jeopardized the integrity of that case by providing some information, and then our detectives are in a tough spot when they testify in court, right? Because they're testifying, we arrested this guy, and then all of a sudden a defense attorney rightly would say, well, geez, isn't it true that you told them 5 years ago that this was your suspect? But now you're here, my client's here, so what? It clouds the case.
I want to sit down with you because I still have quite a
Anytime.
few cold cases.
Anytime, come on over. We've spoken before over in Seattle, so anytime you're welcome to come
Yeah,
over and talk to me.
'cause I still
Anytime.
got the
Let me know.
ones.
I can come meet you, whatever.
Okay,
We'll take
thank
care of
you.
it.
I was just saying to the former chief here that was an excellent explanation, man. I felt like I was watching an episode of CSI.
All right.
Okay.
Got it all on tape. We can
Thank
use that.
you.
All right.
Counselor
it, man?
Green.
I was
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
Thanks, Chief. I just want to echo what the other counselors have said, that this presentation was great. I really appreciate it. Two quick questions. One, what's the cost of hiring a new officer, counting salary as well as benefits, fringe, and everything all in?
Total is, Mr. Lutz,
First year, you're probably talking somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 between the salary, benefits, retirement contribution, and then the instructors to train them and things like that.
Okay, thanks. And then the other question, this is a small thing, but you guys have a budget item for a new website or a website update. And just the question is, I know the city's doing that as well for the citywide. What's the reasoning for having a separate website for the police department versus the rest of the city?
we're also on board with what the city is doing overall. I think that includes, each department probably having to pay something for the services they will be receiving as a part of that larger piece, but we're also included in the one that the city is doing. Ruthney is the one that's heading up our thing there and working with Chief Schaaf to give us a new website and then also a microsite that we will have for recruiting.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Driscoll.
Thank you. So yeah, I guess one, I was curious. You'd mentioned the LGBTQ legislation earlier.
Yes,
What
yes,
does
sir.
that? What does that involve? What does that mean?
Well, it gives our officers some guidance on dealing with the individual who identifies with that demographic. For example, one of the reasons that I first began to look at that is in my time in Louisville, we had an officer that had a complaint on him from a member of the LGBT community, and get my pronoun right. Her complaint, it was a male that identified as a female, is that she was transported to the jail with another male. And she felt that was offensive. When we looked at it, we agreed, but we said to ourselves, well, the officer did, what we've always done in that situation. Right. We'd never been faced with that. So we began looking around the country to see who had policies. We found 4 or 5 policies. We drafted a Louisville policy. I went to Little Rock, became the chief there, and there was a young female who identifies as a male. So he was giving a presentation, and he said that 40% of LBGT individuals have attempted suicide. That disturbed me, and I checked it, and there was not only not a policy in Little Rock PD, but there was not one in the state. No other agency in the state had one. So we drafted one there. So having those two things in my rearview mirror, when I checked here and saw that we didn't have one, when you think of something as simple as referring to someone by the pronoun that they wish to go by, that's a sign of dignity and respect. And if we can do those kinds of things that doesn't compromise officer safety, because we're never going to compromise that. But if that means bringing a female to pat you down, we don't think that there's anything urgent that you have a weapon. If we believe that, then we're going to do what we have to do in that moment. But if you are a male that identifies as a female and you prefer to have a female pat you down, there's no harming us taking the time to do that, because those are the kinds of things that you can do to where you don't unintentionally harm someone. You don't get these lawsuits about doing things, because that's an area of our country where also you're seeing many changes as far as lawsuits are concerned. So we felt that we need to give our officers some guidance in what to do under these circumstances. It won't solve everything, but we think it will give them some general ideas as to how to interact with individuals who are in this demographic, who suffer from discrimination and prejudice stuff in employment, housing, all kinds of things, and we just don't want public safety to be a part of that.
Great. My next question was regarding diversity. I studied your track record, particularly in Little Rock, that you were able to get, compared to the classes that we've had in Syracuse, a tremendous amount of diversity into the force there. Mm-hmm. As we look at our new classes coming forward, do you have any, the response that I've gotten from people is that it's very difficult to engage community of colors and get them to enroll and activate was the pushback that, when we asked for more diverse classes. Mm-hmm. So what is your process? How have you been trying to engage people, like communities of color, more into enrolling into new classes?
It starts from my pen. It starts from my desk. I have to take on the mindset that is difficult, but it's not impossible. Everyone in the organization has to know that we genuinely subscribe to diversity, not a pat yourself on the back moment, but because it's the right thing to do. And then I have to develop community partners and stakeholders that makes recruiting from a diverse standpoint a community responsibility and not a police responsibility. That's when I begin to get traction in Little Rock, because if I walk into the Hispanic community and try to recruit Hispanics, some people may listen, but if I go in there with community stakeholders who are Hispanic, who are now saying that we would like to see people that look like us, who understand our language, and we will be proud to see you in a Syracuse Police Department uniform, that's when we begin to get an increase in the number of people who will be in our process. The other part of that is to get our arms wrapped around these young people at a younger age. With that in mind, we are in the process of forming a formal relationship with the PSLA program at Fowler. So these kids, when they're 15, 16, before they make mistakes, before they do things that will knock them out in the background process of our application process, we want to wrap our arms around them to create a pipeline from that high school program to the Syracuse Police Department. And we think that those kinds of things of getting community stakeholders, making it a community responsibility, and then forming relationships with people at a younger age, we think that we will be able to increase that. And I'm confident that this class that will start on May the 21st, you will see an already increase in the number of black and brown individuals and also females for our first class.
Great, that's awesome. Well, I have about 3 more questions, but I know we're running out of time, and I want to show respect to my fellow counselors, so I'll reach out to you on the private. But do you have others?
Yeah, just a few,
I'll
just a
let
few.
Lovejoy here now.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here.
Afternoon.
I wanted to explain first the victory dances and wiggles that are happening here in Pagani Telephone, which is that we've just announced, that the state has just announced that the grid is going to be, yes, we're very excited. The grid is the chosen path for 81 replacement.
81. Yep.
That is a little happy dance.
Now you'll need only 80 more traffic people.
Right,
So-
right.
No disrespect to you, we just wanted to explain.
Understood, understood,
Exciting news.
understood.
That's the buzz. You mentioned recruiting new classes and retaining those folks as being an issue. Did I mishear you that there's some you're looking at how to retain more of those new classes, or is that not an issue that you're saying?
I didn't mention retention, but retention is certainly an issue. I will tell you, particularly, this is one of the things that unions do a great job of making sure that this is part of the conversation, because we have to put things on the carrot to make people stick around longer. We have a number of people because of the 160th, and I'll be honest with you to tell you that I don't fully understand it, but I do know that because of the folks who are no longer under that financially it's not really beneficial for them to stay much longer beyond their eligibility. There has to be financial incentives in place for individuals to want to stick around and do, 25 years, 30 years, those kinds of things, and we have to figure out what that is. Obviously, that costs dollars, and we have to think about, how we go about doing that, but retention is certainly a big piece of that. And then the other part of retention is that people need to feel valued at work. So we have to create environments where people will want to work for Syracuse PD, feel like that they have opportunities to move throughout the organization, and it's our responsibility to do that. But retention is a big piece of keeping a solid workforce.
You also mentioned earlier the importance of developing policies with the intention of reducing lawsuits, and the LGBTQ policy was one that you mentioned. Are
Yes,
there
ma'am.
other areas that, certainly we have been concerned at different times in the past about lawsuits related to the police. Are there other areas in which you feel that policies should be forthcoming as a lawsuit prevention, as a strategy for protecting the city?
Well, I don't know if I have a policy per se. What we did with use of force was a part of any assessment that a new chief of police is going to do when you walk into an organization. I will tell you that pursuits is a common topic of discussion of things that you look at with a high level of scrutiny to make sure that our policy is reflective of 21st century issues that we have today. For example, how much sense does it make to do 90 miles an hour in a city that's densely populated, there's 25 square miles for a traffic violation? Doesn't make sense. I can tell you that one of the reasons that it hasn't been at the top of my list of policies that I normally would look at is because operationally, when I've listened to the radio, our supervisors and managers do an excellent job of counseling pursuits that where the value of apprehending that individual outweighs the risk that we have. So I can tell you that operationally, I feel like that this workforce does a great job of that. I'm still going to look at the policy to make sure that the language is what I believe it should be versus a 21st century police department, but operationally, I feel like that we do a decent job with that so far. But that's a part of looking at all of our policies. And another piece of that is adding that sergeant to training, because I want everyone from the chief of police to a brand new police officer to go through annual in-service training. I can't tell you that it's important for you to brush your teeth if I have cavities. So if a workforce where the chief is not engaged in training or other executives, it sends the wrong message. So I can tell you that going forward with this in-service thing, everyone in our organization will have annual training, and you will see that that be a significant piece of our professional, I would say DNA, as training is very, very important. And it reduces lawsuits.
Thank you.
There was one thing that I wanted to highlight that you said that I can't find the slide that we showed, the hiring of the 6 classes. Which document is that in?
Page 3 in that one, sir.
In this one? If you go to page 3 in your overtime, page 3 in your overtime document, it shows, I'm showing page 2 in this one. Okay, page 2. If you look at that, you can see across that 6 years that in 2013-14, there were 23 individuals that were hired. No, those are retirements. It is 3. Go to page 3. Show me the one for page 3. It is page 3, I'm sorry. So there were a couple of years to where in 2013-14 and then also in 17-18 to where we had no classes. It takes us too long to turn a ship around. And when we have years to where you don't hire police officers, it impacts you for multiple years going forward. I just want to put it in the universe that I know that you already make public safety a priority, but going a calendar year without hiring police impacts you multiple years afterwards because it takes so long to catch up.
Thank you, Chief.
Any other questions?
Appreciate that, because we put the money in the budget for you.
Well, I don't know what happened, ma'am. I don't know what happened. I'm just saying that we hope not to do that going forward.
Okay, that concludes this public safety meeting with the budget